So welcome everyone. We're very excited that you're here and nice to see you. Um, we're back for session three, author session three. Welcome with Bob Giacalone today, and very excited to be here and be here with you. So we're going to follow a similar design that we've done in other sessions, which Anthony will share more about in a bit. Um, Anna, Anthony, and I are not going to introduce ourselves because you all know us by this point, but we're all very happy to hold this space, and it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here with Bob. I had reached out to Bob over the summer when finding his work specifically that was relating moral injury into an organizational context, which I was really interested in, and we have a number of people on this call that also have a lot of research expertise around moral injury, so that's also very exciting. Bob is the Fields Chair in Ethics and Corporate Responsibility at the McCoy School of Business at Texas State University. He is a prolific writer, and so he has done and researcher. So over a decade, many over 100 papers, extensive writing, extensive speaking, and also an incredible passion for this topic. And so it's really our honor to welcome Bob into the space, and also huge appreciation for all the enthusiasm you've brought, which you will all hear very, very soon. His enthusiasm for the topic and bringing you all here. Uh, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited for this conversation today. As you know, the New Work series invites authors who help us see the different dynamics of the status quo and also offering ways to go beyond it. And this edition does that in the context of organizations, including how they shape us and sometimes make it hard to live in line with what we say we value. And I think Bob's work starts from a really sobering premise that unethical behavior at work isn't just a compliance issue, but a health issue. And unethical acts create stress, trauma that ripple out into anxiety, depression, burnout, different harmful manifestations. And I believe all of us here care about doing as little harm as possible, but sometimes it turns out it's harder than it should be when we are inside wider systems that are frankly quite unhealthy. So our workspaces carry many layers of harm, and most of us were never taught about how to deal with trauma, pain, or stress in healthy ways, let alone in environments built around performance, pressure. So it's kind of like we are trying to navigate this terrain with the skill set we mostly don't have. And that's why I think Bob's work feels so important for this series, because he helps to name things that often we feel viscerally but struggle to articulate. And I think that is really helpful for us to regain any agency to intervene in the context we find ourselves in, acting in ways that support healing, is awareness to be able to understand what's happening and to interrupt those things. So I think brings Bob lens into this conversation with everybody lived experiences and realities feels like exactly the kind of dialogue this series is meant to hold. And as I said, I'm really excited about having this conversation with all of you today. But before we get started, I will pass over to you, Anthony.
Hello. Thank you guys for being here. And that's where I think it's really, we should all start. I mean, Bob, thank you for your willingness to join us and share your gifts with us. And more importantly, I believe there's a genius, a collective genius that we're all tapping into today. For those who've been here, the flow is going to be very similar to what we've done before. We're going to begin with some opening questions. And then Bob and Anna are going to engage in a Q&A. And then we're going to invite you into a fishbowl dynamic, and then we'll close. It's really that flow seems to work for us. It's really that simple. Also, it's really important, especially in today's terms, that the recording, we'll be recording the first part, but we'll stop at the fishbowl for sensitivity so that if there's any burning questions, you don't have to worry about being filmed or taped or those thoughts being shared, without your permission or whatever. With that, I would say let's get started. Let's dive in. Here's the QR code for the Mentimeter, or you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 863-371-45. So the first question is, what are the effects on individual well-being when workers and organizations act unethically? What are the effects on individual well-being when workers and organizations act unethically? Stress, uncertainty, cynicism, harms to physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health, shifting sands on how to operate, fear, low morale, disconnection, distrust, lack of trust, insecurity, resentment, anxiety, othering. You can see we have this emotional skin in the game: anger, lack of belonging, demotivated, poor productivity. It's good. Lower productivity. Lots and lots of work with little outcomes, Circleville, like that. And Kathy says physical and mental health impact. So our next question is how strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statements? I've witnessed unethical behavior in the workplace that harmed others. I've been harmed by unethical behavior in the workplace. I feel implicated because my organization was connected to harm, even though I wasn't directly involved. I have done things in the workplace I believe were unethical.
So this is our first time to use this functional Mentimeter, so we were interested to see how it adjusts as the responses come in. It's creating, as we had hoped, a kind of dynamic average.
Give a few more seconds for those who haven't responded. So far, it seems like we've all, like, really high have witnessed, I believe it is this one. Have witnessed, I guess, a lot of harm. and we've been harmed. Some of us have done things, and some of us feel implicated. Interesting. Thank you for your candor. Sometimes it's easy to only project the positive stuff.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it's quite striking that basically everyone said that they um, have witnessed unethical behavior, and perhaps that's part of what gets brings you here. But I also suspect that it's also much more pervasive than we typically would expect in our workplaces.
Mhm. Monique, I really appreciate your comments. Sometimes it's hard to know if you've been part of the harm indirectly, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like I've never been, I haven't worked for oil and gas or something that is, by its very essence, in my view, evil, so to speak, or, doing harm to the environment. But when I was answering these questions, a lot of it was seeing how management is treating their staff. And then, I think as a manager, wherever you are in the hierarchy, you try to do something, but did you do enough, or should you have done more, or what was sort of tangential that ended up doing harm that you maybe should have done more for. So that's related to that comment.
Oh, thank you. Any other thoughts before we I'm really nerding out on this conversation that Anna and Bob are about to have because it's we don't think in these terms and it does sound in Kathy, like you're saying, our physical and mental health, there is an impact directly linked to our not only our behavior but how we experience things. So really excited about that. Barring none, I don't see any. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you everyone for sharing that so honestly. I think let's start right there where you were, Anthony, because Bob works really in the middle of all of that. So I love to start by hearing from you, Bob. What pulled you into studying moral injury and how unethical behavior at work affects people's well-being?
Well, first, let me thank everybody for coming here. It's always nice to see that people are interested in something that you're doing. I started out as a psychologist. I've always taught in business school, went into ethics, uh, and I started studying things like why do people pretend to be ethical when they're actually not? What kind of unethical things do people do? Which got me into, of all things, how people sabotage equipment, uh, burn plants down, set off explosions just to get out of work. But much like college has a curriculum, life has a curriculum as well. And as time went on, I started to see more and more really bad things. And so my curriculum, like probably many of you, comes out of saw some really bad things. I saw some people being hurt. I saw myself being hurt. I was subjected, and so other people subjected to things that were absolutely incredible. Um, One of my professors in my doctoral program thought it was great to make concentration camp jokes to a Holocaust survivor and laughed at him. Um, he physically hurt people in experiments. He sexually harassed women. He finally wound up on trial for rape. Um, I worked for a boss who effectively asked me to violate equal opportunity law when I refused. I never got a raise again. He later on went to prison for breaking other laws. These are all, by the way, academics. The ivory tower is quite tarnished, but most people just don't know about it. Um, I worked for another guy who had a very complicated relationship with the truth. He didn't know what the word meant, so he lied all the time. I mean, it's very disorienting when you can't trust somebody with anything that they say. I had a colleague of mine who was sexually assaulted in the parking lot, and her boss told her she should stay at home more so as not to provoke or victimize her. I could go on, but that's how I got into it. That's how I started to see it. That's how I started to feel it. But what I noticed was that with every demon out there that hurt me, that hurt other people, I also saw bosses who didn't want to deal with it. Bosses who talked about the fact that they didn't want any hassles. They didn't want to cause any kind of public relations nightmares. They didn't want any lawsuits. Basically, don't talk about it. That's not what I was interested in. As an ethicist, I looked around and I thought, wow, this is terrible. I mean, this is awful stuff. What are we doing here? How could you just hide this stuff? How could you let this stuff happen? And so I started to look for evidence because I felt like if there were evidence, people who knew about it would do something about it. And I felt like I needed to change the curriculum that I had been subjected to, that I had seen other people subjected to. My curriculum, my new curriculum that I wanted to create was a curriculum of hope, which was based on the fact that we know these bad things are going on. We have evidence these bad things are going on, and we can do something about it. And I tend to be sometimes too much of an optimist, but I really believe that when people know better, they do better. And that's been my goal. Get them to know, get them to understand, get them to see some of this stuff is very dark and we don't want to look at it as human beings. We just don't want to see it. But what we find is that while it hurts to see it, it also motivates us. And that I think brings a lot of hope into the work that I do.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Robert. And I resonated so much with what you said, and I started to get really interested also on the why these unethical behaviors happen and the justifications and the coping mechanisms. And one of the things I find really powerful in your work is how you kind of widen the frame of who is affected by unethical behavior. And I think that feels crucial if we are trying to understand how these dynamics sit like in a whole system, not just in one person. So you, in your research, emphasize that harm extends far beyond just the victim, but also the witnesses, associated people, and even perpetrators themselves. Could you talk a little bit more about that and the unique ways these different roles experience moral injury and well-being impacts?
Sure. I think it's natural to see the victim as the one person being burned because that one is obvious. What we don't pay attention to is everything else that's going around that victim. And what's going around that victim are other people who are watching this behavior. People who are going, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. People who feel powerless to be able to help that victim in any way because the victimizer is generally a person with more power or maybe someone who's literally out of their minds and just does things that that most rational people wouldn't do. And what happens is they begin to get stressed out. They don't know how to deal with it. They begin to worry. The victim, the victimizer, keeps doing things very often knowing it's wrong. And since nobody stops the victimizer just keeps doing it, right? That's just, that, I did it, nothing happened, I keep doing it. And those people are part of the equation of what's happening. But the other part of the equation, which I think is a real big one that no one likes to talk about, is These are all human beings, and they leave the work setting. They leave, they go out, they go back to their lives outside of work, and they take the stressors and the traumas and the fears and the sense of helplessness with them. And so they go home. They go home and they spread this to their families. They're stressed out. They don't know how to deal with things. Very often they go home and this is bothering them. And so they may, snap at their kids, snap at their spouses, right? And you think to yourself, well, yeah, we know some of that, right? We call it secondary traumatization, but it goes much deeper than that because the people then at home, they go out into the world. So the kid who has watched his parents stressed out, scared, angry, maybe being snapped at, go to school the next day. When they go to school the next day, there's a teacher there who gets the brunt of that stress and that fear and that sense of helplessness. And then that teacher goes home to his or her family and continues to spread it. So, this whole notion that we've got that there's this one victim who's going to get sick is incorrect. All of those people can have stress responses, trauma responses, psychological responses, and ultimately physical responses as well. But in the middle of all of this is an organizational environment that becomes corrupted, it becomes toxic. And all of that together creates ramifications for things like turnover and absenteeism and insurance costs and just the very sense of what people trying to do at work becomes toxified. So all of these things come together in a system. I would like to describe it as a beautiful system, not because I like it, but because it's so intricate and so difficult to understand and to tease out the different parts of it. And that has been something that I've become passionate about because I think lurking in every corner is another impact. Most of the work that we're doing right now has focused in on physical and psychological well-being. But this kind of damage does damage to social well-being. People don't want to talk to other people. They're afraid to talk to them. They're afraid that, people are going to break down from the things that have happened to them. It toxifies people's spiritual well-being, their sense of meaning. What the heck am I doing in a place that is actually doing these types of things to people? So I think the complexity there is something that most of us, I think, understand at a deeper level, but we don't want to deal with it. The terror of the victim is just so bad. Fear of the victimizer is just so bad that we can't go to those places sometimes. I really believe that people put a wall in front of themselves not to deal with these things.
Totally, totally. What I'm hearing is that harm travels differently depending on where you are standing, but it travels everywhere. And I really appreciate how you are kind of starting to explain how these cycles of harm starts until these unhealthy dynamics become a kind of vortex that consumes everything around. And you make this important distinction between acute and chronic moral injury, because we often focus on these high stakes, huge, like polemic things or ethical failures, but much of the damage also comes from this chronic exposure to lower level ethical violations that remain unaddressed. And I think this is the question I have related to what Monique put in the chat. Like, do you think that this slow erosion also contributes to a kind of normalization of harm where people start adjusting their moral baselines?
Yeah, if I can frame it this way, the nice thing in quotes about the acute stuff is no one can deny it. I mean, it's there. People go into offices and start shooting people. You can't deny that that happened. You see it. All of this lower level chronic stuff is very easy to deny. And yes, it becomes normalized, but it becomes normalized in a different kind of way. It's not that people look at this and think it's all right. They don't. They never think it's all right. But they know that it's going to be there, that it's always going to be there. And so what they start to do is figure out ways to adjust. That's what it comes down to. Look, as human beings, we try to survive. You know, and when the situation becomes very difficult, we do everything we can to cope with what's in front of us. It's a very normal response. So what people start to do is they start tamping down on their emotional experiences. They start denying them, and that sometimes works. Unfortunately, that tamping down doesn't make the emotion go away. All it does is it crushes it, and that begins to create more stress, and that begins to create more sense of fear and hopelessness and helplessness. Some people take that and think, I'm sorry, I'm not dealing with this anymore. And they start looking for another job. So they leave. So that is part of normalization. But the other part of normalization, which is the scarier part to me, is that this opens up new possibilities for some people to engage in really bad stuff. Because what becomes normalized is not just that this continues to go on, but what becomes normalized is that no one's doing anything about it. So, hey, I can do it too. Right? So they start to behave in ways that are simply untenable because no one has stopped them. Right? They've seen no one else being stopped, and they are now enraged. And that's what they do. They respond in ways that are simply unacceptable under normal conditions. But what's happened is they've begun to adjust to the system, right? And the system is one that says, hey, look, this is going to go on all the time. No one's going to protect you. So now you start thinking about, okay, what do I do? Right? Um, and a lot of people will retaliate. They may not retaliate to the victimizer's face, but they'll retaliate in the background. They might retaliate, for example, by undermining business relationships, which hurts the customers, right? So the what happens here is that what is a very low level chronic state of problem behaviors begins to transmogrify into something even nastier, right? People get sick, people who start to retaliate, people who start doing violent things, unethical things that then upsets other people. And then those other people begin to have to adjust. So it's a very horrible cycle. But once it starts in the system, that's what you're going to get.
Totally, totally. I think this relationship between individual and ethical behaviors that feed slowly unhealthy organizational cultures and vice versa is really interesting. And I would really like to go a little bit there on like organizational mechanisms that perpetuate these cycles, because I think there is on one side the fear of speaking out about moral unethical things happening. And also sometimes people that perpetuate unethical acts are doing that because of pressures, professional pressures or authority demands or something like that. So from your perspective, what are some of the psychological and organizational mechanisms that make it more likely for unethical behaviors to spread?
I think the first thing we have to do is we have to distinguish two different types of people who are engaging in unethical behavior. There's a group of people who we call dark personality types. These are narcissists, Machiavellians, sadists, psychopaths. These people do it for the sport of it. They're just nasty people. Whatever the reasoning behind their psychological makeup, that's what they do. And if you look at the data, for example, 1 to 4% of the population in the world is made up of psychopaths. So these are people who have absolutely no sense of compassion for other people. They don't have any kind of sense of, no, this is wrong. They just behave this way naturally. So those people are a much more difficult way of dealing with it. And what I tell executives when I work with them is the only way of stopping them is to never let them in your organization. That's what you have to do with them. Now you go to other people who are not these personality types. So what drives them? I the reward system, first of all, drives them. They look around, they say, what's being rewarded here? Right? What are the rewards? Oh, okay, you're being rewarded for selling a lot of things, right? And you're not selling the things that the customers need, but that's what you get, right? And so reward systems absolutely are a big thing. Self-interest is a big thing. And self-interest is going to drive a lot of the way people behave because people are going to look around and in the absence of ethical leadership, in the absence of support, they're going to go to what's going to work for them. So if they're getting pressured, for example, they're going to do what they need to do to get that pressure off of them. If the way they're being rewarded in terms of raises and promotions is by doing anything they need to do to get the company to make money, then that's what they're going to do. There's also a kind of ethical Stockholm syndrome that goes on, where the people who are being victimized actually begin to associate with their victimizers. They look around and go, you know what? I actually heard somebody say this. I think he's a slime bag for doing what he's doing, but he's really smart. He figured out how to work within this system, right? And they begin to say, "Oh, I guess it's okay. I'll keep doing that kind of stuff." So in the very worst conditions, all of these reward systems, the Stockholm syndrome, the self-interest, the pressures, get people to start viewing ethical people as being the problem, right? We call this stigmatization. So we look around and what we see are people who are going, oh, wow, if that person with high standards knows what we're about to do, they're going to try and stop me. And if they stop me, there go my rewards, right? There go my promotions. There go my raises. So I'm going to stigmatize that person, make them look like they're either crazy or that they're irrational in the way they view ethics or that they're extremely ethical, that no one would ever go along with that. And when that happens, Anna, what you've got is a system that has absolutely imploded because of those people now are looking at the good people as the enemy. Once that happens, the culture further toxifies. You've got more issues going on, and what you see is the spiral continues to go downward.
Absolutely. And I love the Stockholm Syndrome metaphor because I think it applies and explains so well so many different dynamics. And I think what you just said really helps in of course, there are bad actors, but I think it helps us seeing this kind of system level sickness or pathology. So as you said before about the coping mechanisms, we can also see the use of this kind of psychological painkillers to deal, like denial, minimization, cognitive dissonance, that kind of shoots from this moral pain, but that also becomes a factor in allowing the problem to replicate and spread. Do you find this metaphor of kind of a social sickness or virus helpful for describing how you see how unethical behavior and moral injury propagate?
Yeah, I think I like this idea of these techniques that people use, the neutralization of what's going on. They look around. There are literally dozens of tactics that people use to begin to justify horrible things that they do, horrible things that other people do. And once that begins to work, what happens is other people learn the techniques. They look right, go, oh, okay, well, I could justify it this way, or I could justify it that way, or here's a good excuse for why I did it. And they actually begin to anticipate how other people are going to respond. Well, when they do that, Everyone learns and it becomes replicated. It's basically a virus. I think that's what you're getting at. Uh, the pathogens spread through the system very quickly. Let me give you one really great example that a lot of us have seen. There are a group of people out there now who like to excuse things through what is being labeled as post-truth thinking. So post-truth thinking is a way of looking at decisions and the way you see the world and think that what's important is not what's really going on. What's important is how you feel about it. So if you feel it's okay, it's okay. If you think it's the right thing to do, it is the right thing to do. The evidence doesn't make any difference, right? Well, that is such a stupid idea if you think about it, right? Like, I can't wake up in the morning of a cloudy day and say, I don't like this because it doesn't feel good to me. So therefore it's sunny. Well, it's not sunny. You can't make this stuff up. But what's happened is people are all beginning to fall into line, right? I had a student in my class say to me rather recently, she said, everybody has their truth and I have mine. And I said, well, that's simply inaccurate. I said, years ago, they would put people in institutions for saying things like that because they were devoid of reality, right? I can't wake up one day and claim something that isn't true because I have my own truth. No, we live in a world of truth that we all have to deal with. That idea has become a true pathogen, right? It's a true pathogen in the culture. People all do this one after another. We're seeing it now. And what's happening is it's creating an immense amount of cynicism, right? People look around and go, well, if you could claim this and say it's okay, and everyone just shakes their head and says, yeah, I guess that's right, then I can do it too, right? So people become very cynical about the system. People become very cynical about what is true or not because we don't know whether or not the truth is being told to us or this is just a big manipulation game. And that begins to get more people modeling that behavior, right? People just begin to model it. And we begin to see the stuff spread. So, for example, we see the spread that occurs with an emotional contagion. People get upset, they get other people upset, right? People begin to get upset from what they've seen. Those people get upset when they encounter other people, and on and on and on and on. And as I said before, this goes outside the organization as well as inside, right? People begin to have a sense of narrative inheritance where they have stories they tell themselves, stories they tell other people, right? Those stories begin to get passed through. There was an author that once said, if you want to poison a culture, poison its stories, right? When you've got poison stories in organizations, they're going to, well, all they can do is pass on poisons. That's all they've got. There's nothing else. And then you've got people who have been perpetrators and learn over time that they can use these techniques to get away with things, and it perpetuates it even more. Other leaders do that, other followers do that. The cycle is very viral. It's very viral. Here's the good thing though. Once you know that, once you know that it's viral, you can cut the chords. If you can see arrows going from one place to another, you can figure out techniques that can change those things. And that I think is critical because it works the same way as any virus would. You figure out what the transmission is, you figure out what the pathology is, and then you go after that. So knowing that and seeing that and viewing it as a viral problem allows you to formulate strategies to stop the virus, right? Or at the very, maybe not even stop it all the time, but be able to mitigate it.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. The first step to be able to heal is first to recognize the sickness. So, wow, I really appreciate everything you brought, Bob. I think this sets up such a rich ground for conversation. So I want to make sure everyone has also space to share. So maybe we go for the fishbowl now and open the space for participants to also bring their questions and experiences in.